Hello, I'm Colleen, and today we are going to discuss light academia. In the reading world, it seems that dark academia is far more popular than light, and they both have their merits. The best way for me to distinguish between the two is to think of them almost seasonally. Most dark academia stories take place in either autumn or winter. It's more about like the falling light and ominous weather, foggy days, dark nights, that kind of idea. Light academia has much more of a spring and summer feel. It doesn't say that they only take place in those seasons. You can have a very light academia fall or winter, but it's more about sunny days or windy days or moonlit evenings than it is scary fog where someone might be waiting to murder you. Both aesthetics and sort of frames of mind focus heavily on academics, but sort of different factions of them. Whereas in dark academia, you might have a scene in which a character is studying by candlelight in a library that's haunted, and they're translating a new work of Latin that's never been found before. Whereas light academia is more likely to have a scene in which the main character is sitting beneath a willow tree reading a poem while their friend sings a Welsh folk song and their soulmate sketches the landscape. In truth, I do like reading both dark and light academia, but if I had to pick one of these worlds to live in, I would 100% want to live in a light academia world. So the main philosophy of light academia is to look at the collecting of knowledge and wisdom and practicing of art as a joyous occasion. You are doing this to bring yourself happiness. You are studying to gain knowledge and therefore elevate your soul. There's a lot of focus on the beauty of art and poetry and music rather than sort of the darkness that can come about studying these subjects. In light academia, there's less death. If there is death, it's grieved in a normal and healthy fashion rather than, like digging up a dead body to snuggle it. Heathcliff. Wuthering Heights is definitely dark academia. There are lots of other subsets of the academia aesthetic / literature movement: romantic, witchy, classic, theater, but light and dark are the two big ones. So let's move on to some recommendations for you. This is going to be slightly different than my normal recommendations because I'm not going to give you just like a list of titles. I'm also going to give you some broader recommendations in terms of genre and even like type of book you're reading. So let's get started. I think we should begin with who I would call the queen of light academia, and that is Jane Austen. And not all of her novels would fall in the light academia sphere, but there are three in particular I would put in there. They are Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility, and Emma. First, in Pride and Prejudice, we have that whole discussion between Lizzie and Mr. Darcy as to what makes a fine young woman, I think is what they call it, in which they talk about studying instruments and painting and reading and being a good conversationalist. And a lot of those attributes are really like light academia type pursuits. There's lots of playing the piano. There's lots of going for walks and enjoying nature, which is a huge part of light academia, to really get outside and view the beauty of nature. Sense and Sensibility has the whole moving to a cottage, which is not by their choice, but they do live this sort of idyllic pastoral life in, rich poverty, Jane Austen's version of poverty, and that has a very light academia feel. Emma, again, we have sort of a lighter view of life through Emma's eyes. She is wealthy, but it's very country. We're not in London or Bath or any of the larger cities. We are in the countryside in England. I did not include Northanger Abbey, which is obviously like super gothic and very dark academia vibes, or Persuasion, because I find Persuasion to have some darker themes and it doesn't feel as sort of like lighthearted as some of the other ones. And I also didn't include Mansfield Park because I will never recommend that book. Next on my list is Alice in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. Now, This is an interesting one, but hear me out. I know a lot of people would probably classify this more as like a cottagecore type book, but the reason I have it on my light academia list is because that is a book with a lot of philosophical discussions going on symbolically, which feels very academic to me. And the whimsy of Alice in Wonderland is very light academia. We do have the Queen of Hearts, who is trying to cut off people's heads, but it's such a ridiculous nature in which it's happening that it's not really scary. It's more just, madness. I used to work at a bookstore that a few summers in a row we did this challenge where we had to read a classic in the summer, and then we did like a big classics display with our reviews in August. And one summer I read Anna Karenina, and so the next summer I read Alice in Wonderland, because I was like, I'm not doing another huge tome. I want to read something light and fun. Next, a modern author and book that I really enjoyed that I feel like fits this bill is The Forgotten Garden by Kate Morton. I used to own this. I know I lent it to someone, but I can't remember who. This is sort of a grown-up version of The Secret Garden. It's a sort of historical mystery that spans 100 years about a woman trying to figure out the life of her grandmother. Her grandmother had arrived on a boat in Australia alone from England with a book of fairy tales, and she couldn't really tell anyone how she got there. This happened when she was a child. And then we follow her granddaughter unraveling this mystery that has to do with a garden in England. It's very beautiful. There's a lot of research in it, which is what gives it sort of the academic vibe. A lot of Kate Morton's books, would say, fall on the academic vibe because they have a lot of art and people trying to research things that have happened in the past. If you haven't tried Kate Morton, The Forgotten Garden is very good. The Clockmaker's Daughter is fantastic. The House at Riverton. She has a lot of really good titles I'd recommend. Another great light academia title is Little Women by Louise May Alcott, and I'll talk more about that in a different section, but keep it in mind. Also, The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, I think is how you say his last name, is gorgeous, and you should read it if you haven't. It is an allegory tale, and when you read this book, you cannot believe this wasn't written like 1,000 years ago, because it's so timeless and the story is so lovely, and it just really, buy this book, read it in an afternoon, and you'll fall in love, I promise. I've read quite a few of his books. Now, Brida also is fantastic. It doesn't have the same like academia vibe as this one, but if you're interested in past lives, you should definitely read Brida. I also read The Valkyries and The Witch of Portobello, I think is what it's called. And I didn't love those as much. I thought those were good books, but they didn't like make me think about them for months, which both The Alchemist and Brida did. All right, let's move into some more grouped items, starting with Shakespeare's comedies. You can't have an academia list without Shakespeare. I haven't read that many of his comedies. I did a video about all the Shakespeare I'm planning to read this year, and I will put it in the description. But I have several comedies on that list. I've got Much Ado About Nothing, All's Well That Ends Well, and As You Like It. But the comedies I have read, Midsummer Night's Dream, Twelfth Night, The Winter's Tale, are fabulous choices if you're in a light academia mood. Midsummer Night's Dream is wonderful because it has a play within a play, which is so fun. It has all the woodland whimsy and the fairies, which is very nature focused. Twelfth Night is a really fun play. It's about twins who are in a shipwreck, and they both think the other didn't survive, and the girl twin decides to impersonate her brother because it'll be safer for her. If you've seen the movie She's the Man, it's based on Twelfth Night, which is a lovely play. I very much recommend it. And then lastly, The Winter's Tale. I just did a whole video reviewing it because I loved it so much, and you should check it out. The first 3 acts are very dark academia, dark tragedy, but then the second 2 really bring it back up into the lighter side of things that give it the light academia feel. Now, if you are American, you probably remember studying the Transcendentalists in either high school or in college, and they were a group of writers who lived in Concord, Massachusetts in the late 1800s, like mid to late 1800s, and they had this new philosophy on life. Now, the most famous transcendentalists are Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau. But my favorite transcendentalist was Margaret Fuller. And I have her book, Women in the 19th Century, which is probably the most heavily annotated book I've ever had from school. Almost every page has several things underlined. I was an underliner, not a highlighter. And I have so many pages that are dog-eared that I loved, and I've just left the dog ears in them to go back and reread her writing. She's a really great feminist writer, and just if you like reading feminist philosophy or feminist essays, definitely check out Margaret Fuller if you haven't. She was very good friends with Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau, and also Louisa May Alcott's father, what was his name? Bronson? Can't remember. And they all sort of mentored Louisa May Alcott, in particular Emerson, but their relationships were very interesting. Nathaniel Hawthorne was in there as well. Henry David Thoreau is most famous for Walden, which is his sort of meditation on living in nature. The transcendentalist philosophy had a lot to do with like enjoying the beauty of nature, that humanity was innately good, and that your spirituality should come from within, not from organized religion. They had a lot of similarities with the Romantics movement in England about 100 years earlier, which that was more like Byron and Keats. But they were like more heavily into science than the Romantics. They also really loved the idea of like utopian societies, which now our culture is like totally off that. We're all about dystopian. But they wrote some good stuff about like what a utopia would look like and how one could be fashioned in early America. Next, I'd recommend poetry, and basically any poetry. If you want to feel like a light academic, read beautiful poetry that makes you feel joyous. And this can be modern poetry. This can be classic poetry. This can even, to a certain extent, be song lyrics, in my opinion. I honestly think one of the best poets of our current time is Florence Welch, who's, Florence and the Machine. If you ever just take the time to read her lyrics, they're so beautiful and could really stand without the music. Some of my favorite poets are Robert Frost. I'm a huge Emily Dickinson person. I've talked about how much I love her before. This is a great book also if you want to just get like a small Emily Dickinson. I don't think it's all of her poems, but it's got her best ones are in here. I also love Pablo Neruda, and this book right here, his love poems, I read this like 100 times when I was pregnant with my twins. It was just sort of like, I get really focused when I'm pregnant on certain things. And like when I was pregnant with my daughter, I got really focused on the poem Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening, because she was born in the winter. And I got really focused on this poem, which I don't even know how to pronounce the title, Epithalamium, when I was pregnant with my twins. And I read it over and over and over again. And I still go back and read it every once in a while just to reclaim some of that adoration. Now, I'm also going to recommend you try your hand at philosophy if you are feeling like a light academic. There's such a wide range of philosophy. I did minor in philosophy in college, so I really like philosophy, but I have noticed that I've sort of stepped away from reading it, especially for fun. If you are just starting out, I'd recommend Plato as a really good philosopher to start with, or these two books, The Tao of Pooh and The Tale of Piglet. These are kind of weird, but so delightful. So they frame the Winnie the Pooh stories as philosophical discussions, and they're sort of lovely. They're very easy to understand, so if you want to start with something, I would recommend starting with these. My Piglet one I took to the beach and it's like destroyed, but I haven't given it away because I do think I want to reread it at some point, and it still works. No pages fell out. My personal favorite philosopher of all time is Luce Irigaray, and I actually Googled to see if she was still alive last night, and she is, and we have the same birthday, which I never knew. She's in her 90s though. But this is my favorite book she wrote, The Sex Which Is Not One. And you can tell it's my favorite because I bought it used for college. And so it's got that ugly used sticker on it. And I will never give it away. I graduated over 15 years ago. Not quite 20. And it's such a cool story. If you like The Matrix, you need to read the first chapter, The Looking Glass from the Other Side. Because whoever wrote The Matrix, the Wachowski brothers, did they write it? I know they directed it. Definitely read this book. a little bit of a warning. This is like an anti-Freud philosophy book, so it does go like heavily into like sexuality. So if that's something you're not interested in, you probably wouldn't like this book. She has another book called Between East and West, which I do own, but I'm not sure where it is. That's about the difference between philosophy in Western civilization and Eastern civilization, which is also an interesting read and doesn't touch on sexuality, if I remember correctly. Another fun thing to read, and this is something you just have to go to your local library and see what they have, are to read collections of letters. When I was a junior in college, I took a class on the Concord Writers, which is basically like the Transcendentalists, and we all had to do different papers, and I did a research paper on the relationship of Margaret Fuller and Ralph Waldo Emerson as shown through their letters. And let me tell you, sitting in my university library, which was a very light and airy library, it was not like a dark and dismal library, reading the letters of Ralph Waldo Emerson and Margaret Fuller was an amazing experience that I'm so happy I had. Sometimes it's difficult to find like collections of letters, and there are some, I was looking like on Amazon, there are some you can find. But if you live near a university and have access to a university library, they probably have some pretty cool stuff in there that you could get your hands on. And you might not be able to take it out, but you could probably find a sunny spot and spend a morning looking over letters. My last recommendation is very personalized to you, and that is to study something you're super interested in. And it can really be anything. Are you interested in the Aztec Empire or Imperial China or French or calculus or geology? Or do you really want to know more about the 90s grunge movement or the jazz age or Bach or the Impressionists or like anything you can think of? Research it. Give yourself the joy of gaining new knowledge. That's the most like light academia thing I can think of. And you don't have to do it alone. Your public library is standing by, and if you don't want to go in, my library has this wonderful thing where you can message a librarian, like kind of like old school instant messenger / Facebook Messenger, and they'll talk to you and they'll tell you what books work and what articles they can send you. And I just did this like 2 weeks ago because I was having a hard time finding something, and I am a librarian. But give yourself that joy of knowledge. That's very light academia. I hope these recommendations were fun and that you are in a very light academia mood now. Maybe you'll read some poetry beneath a willow tree. Have a lovely rest of your morning, afternoon, evening, or night. See you soon.